Good morning, Melanie.
Good morning slash afternoon, Derek.
Yes, it's afternoon here. I'm happy to say. Good to see you again.
Always good to see you.
As you know, we're in our second batch of 10 episodes. And, we recently did one where we sort of looked back at the first set of 10. And what's connecting one of those episodes to this one was our conversation with Rita around financial literacy and financial planning. And something that you said to me at the beginning of that episode sticks with me because we were talking about the pandemic and we are talking about just planning your financial future, planning for sort of things that come up in life and how to plan for those. And one of the things that you said to me is that we don't have, because of the pandemic, we didn't have the luxury of being casual about our finances and about our planning anymore.
Yeah.
And not to say that I guess I was being a little bit casual because I do have a will, but I don't really have an estate plan, which is what we're talking to today's guest about. But your comment has stuck with me since then. Not that I've done anything with it, but it stuck with me. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a good conversation for me to learn something new.
And it's not always in the conversation for Black folks in particular to think about estate planning, to think about having an estate, something that you're going to plan for, how it lives on after you're no longer on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But also how to care for yourself and your means if you're incapacitated while you're still here.
Right.
Was definitely a critical question when we really had no idea where the public health emergency that was the pandemic was heading. And I know I scurried to try to get emergency planning in place for people close to me in my life to be able to make decisions if I ended up in the hospital. But there's also then the big picture. There's the big picture of if you own a home, especially, what happens with your property once you're gone. So these are important things for us to think about, especially if we're thinking about building wealth from the perspective of sustainability, being responsible to ourselves, but also responsible to the people who are left with our affairs.
Mm-hmm. And I think we can even extend the definition of what property is, or maybe I'm extending it on my own, as just the idea of a checking account or a savings account. I don't know if that counts as property per se.
Asset.
Asset. Yes, that's probably the best term. Assets, like what happens with those? I mean, I think a lot of people in the recent past, have thought about what happens to my Facebook account? What happens to my Instagram account when I die? And it's like, well, what about your checking account? What about your savings account? What about some of these other things that are
for? Who are the beneficiaries of your retirement accounts? Have you thought about that? Have you updated that? Yeah.
Right. Or have you even created one too?
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably a whole different conversation. But if you have created one and you have these things, you have these assets, how are you protecting them and how will you transfer them to other people going forward? And I think a lot of people might limit their thinking to a will. And you sent me an article from Consumer Reports. So I'll just show it right quickly. That was titled "Why People of Color Are Less Likely to Have a Will." And I don't remember all the reasons, but I remember one of them was people just don't like talking about death.
Yeah.
Whether it's cultural or just personally, don't like talking about death. Some people also just think they're too young. They think they're too young to have a will. And I think the third one,
people don't have an estate. The word estate feels charged.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Scary, and it feels like that's not me. It's not who I'll ever be, or it's not who I can get to be. It's not who I want to be. And we're going to learn from today's guest that your affairs are your estate. And better for you to make the decisions before you're gone than in a state like Massachusetts, the state making those decisions for you. So absolutely, this is critical for all of us to think about our affairs, specifically our assets, as part of an estate that needs to be tended to.
Right. And Consumer Reports, so when they did this survey, they did a survey of about 2,200 or 2,300. So not a huge number of people. But what they found when they broke it down by race and ethnicity was that of the Americans who don't have a will, Latinos, Hispanics were 80%, 82% didn't have a will. 77% of Black folks didn't have a will. 67% of English-speaking Asians didn't have a will, and 61% of white non-Hispanic people did not have a will. So across the board, more than half of Americans who were surveyed did not have a will. At least 2/3 of Americans did not have a will. And just looking at the numbers here, especially for those who are listening and not watching, the survey was conducted in April of 2022, so very recently, almost 2 years ago. And it was of 2,224 adults, so just under 2,300 adults. So again, not a huge number, but still significant in the sense of what it means just through that survey, people.
Yeah, important snapshot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should bring on our guests. I think we need to be educated about some of these things.
Yes. Yes. Today's guest is Kerry Reilly, who I know as an estate planner for the 99%. She is with Danger Law in Newton, Massachusetts. Kerry deeply believes in helping her clients leave love behind, not logistics. Ultimately, estate planning is just that, a plan. Think of it like your out of office memo, as she says. It's a mechanism to ensure that the people of your choice can act on your behalf and or your family's behalf when you can't. Money is just one aspect of this. Others are healthcare decisions for you, making sure your business carries on, making sure your family can carry on financially and health-wise. Kerry had her own estate planning practice prior to Danger Law. She had a financial services career with Fidelity Investment and Citi prior to launching her estate planning endeavors. We're excited to hear about what brought her to the estate planning path. And let's welcome her now.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks, Melony and Derek. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. We are part of that 99% that's being referred to in your bio. So we're glad to have you here to give us some information and help us sort of think through these things.
Yeah. So this could be a really short podcast. We all have an estate plan. Thanks for coming. It's a question of, did we write it, or Melony, to your point earlier, did the Commonwealth of Massachusetts write it? So every state has its own laws that tell us how our stuff is going to be managed, either during our lifetime, Melony, as you said, powers of attorney, healthcare proxies, or after the fact, Derek, as you brought up, with a will. Chances are, if we were going to do our own, that's not what we would choose. So my job is to help us get something in place that sounds like us and that has people of our choice acting for us. If we go with our estate's plan, we all know people in our family or in our world we absolutely don't want to know our business. So we don't want those folks to be able to get to our business simply because they're the ones who spoke up first or spoke up the loudest. So the estate planning, really, Melony, to your point, is getting people of our choice to carry out our instructions as we want.
And can I just interject, because as you described that, it's so important about people of our own choice. I know that Danger Law, which is woman-owned and largely LGBTQ owned and run, very much has a perspective about thinking about that for people in the LGBTQ plus community, where family sensitivity about who has access to your affairs and who makes decisions on your behalf is really critical, can be really important. Privacy, confidentiality, and you having the power of who gets to speak on your behalf can be really, really important. So that also comes into play when we're talking about things like the leave behind, as well as your life when you're still on the,
Yes. And the good news is the documents that we prepare with our clients are, for the most part, all changeable. So a lot of folks feel like, oh, my Lord, I have to make one decision for the rest of my life and I'm stuck. You are not stuck. Everything that we do is changeable. So you pick one person now, they live close by. It's great. If they move, you can pick someone else. So you are not locked in to an irreversible decision. You're just going to make the best choice you can based on what you know right now and looking forward a little bit, but always changeable.
That's so important to keep in mind.
When it comes to working with a client on an estate plan, before you actually get to the documents, do you sort of help with the emotional navigation of that? Because, just in thinking about that article that Melanie and I were talking about, some people don't think they have enough. Some people think that they're too young, or they don't like talking about death, or culturally it's not something. Do you help people sort of navigate that before they even begin with the documents?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought up that the word estate is moldy and off-putting. So I completely agree. I know when I start talking about estate, I lose half my audience right away just because people automatically check out. Doesn't apply to me. I don't have enough money. If you have something that you worked very hard to get, whether that's a checking account, a savings account, a house, a stamp collection, a baseball collection, an art collection, and art is personal. The stuff behind me isn't going to end up in any museum, but it's very meaningful and personal to me. And you want it to go where you want it to go. That's an estate. So it's just about getting your things that you value and that you worked very hard to acquire into the hands that you want them in.
And what are some of the ways in which you help people navigate the emotional side of it? Because it sounds very easy the way you described it, but I'm sure there's a lot of complexity and nuance that you have to go through.
So I'm so glad you brought up the out of office memo. Most of us have a job. Most of us work for someone else. And would we take a vacation and just not tell our coworkers what was going to happen? Like, I'm just leaving. Whatever happens, happens. Deal with it. No one would be talking to us in the office when we got back from vacation if we did that. So we generally prepare something, 4 bullet points, 4 pages, a volume, something that tells our coworkers these things might happen while I'm gone, and if they do, this is what you do with them. So you're doing that for someone else, a boss, a coworker. I'm just asking, you have the skills. Let's just do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already done it. You've already thought through it. So let's just do it for you.
That's a good analogy. It's a great analogy, actually. So the 99%, I mean, you described all the things that the 99% could have. So from art to checking account, savings account, all of those things. And so just in thinking about the ways in which we have these really wide divides in the US in terms of the economy, in terms of income, in terms of all of those things, most of us will be the 99%. So, like, how do we, you'll help people once they start talking to you, but how do you, I mean, is there a different way in which people can sort of conceptualize, okay, yes, I can do this. This is worth it to me. And what should they look for when looking for an estate planner?
Yeah. So I'm not the only person professionally who touches this stuff. Melanie, you brought up the point earlier of beneficiary forms.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not willing to take the deep dive into talking to an estate planner because of the emotional baggage, you can start out talking to your local banker. You can start out talking to your financial advisor saying, I want to get my IRA to this person. So how do I do that? And that's just sort of dipping our toes in the water. I have an insurance policy through work. I want to send it to this person. How does that work? So you can take these little steps. You don't need to hire an attorney to do it. And it just starts the thinking and starts the process of the planning. And then when you're ready, you come to someone like me and we talk about it a little bit more formally in a legal sense. And I try to carve it out into the post-death stuff. And Melanie, to your point, I need some help right now. So what adult permission slips do I need?
Mm-hmm.
And those permission slips are powers of attorney and healthcare proxies. And the post-death stuff is the will or a trust.
Can you just talk a little about like what's a healthcare proxy? Because that's a matter that's not about how much money is in your bank account and isn't it enough to having a plan?
Right.
What's the difference of having a healthcare proxy?
So if we have a procedure that requires general anesthesia, there's going to be a period of time where we can't communicate. Just medically, we're not going to be able to communicate. Who has the legal authority to speak with medical people, doctors, nurses, whomever, on your behalf? It is not a document that stays on, so no one is nudge, winking the doctor saying, oh, don't talk to Melanie, talk to me. It only works if we can't communicate and make decisions for ourselves. So, for instance, a general anesthesia. As soon as we're back in the recovery room and we can thumbs up or thumbs down, we're back in charge. So it really is just for whatever period of time we can't make our own healthcare decisions. The hospital will not talk to someone simply because they checked you in. They won't talk to someone simply because you say, this is my partner, my friend, my cousin. They can't. So we don't have this piece of paper that says, oh, Melanie, you named Derek as your healthcare proxy, and Derek is just standing there. They can't talk to Derek.
Yeah. I think I even heard something to that effect again in the beginning of the pandemic, where I think young people who are in college, it's not a given that their parent could speak on their behalf.
Exactly. So as soon as we turn 18, no benefit and all the burden of being an adult. So mom and dad could step in and say, I'm Melanie's parent, talk to me. As soon as we're 18, that permission structure stops. So if someone's in college in another state, if someone has done the semester abroad, even if someone's just in their early 20s and is living somewhere else, is not married, and gets in an accident, if we don't have that document, nobody can help you. And that's when you have to default back to, what does the state give someone permission to do? And that is an extraordinarily expensive, public, and intrusive process.
You're actually bringing up something that I was sort of trying to wrestle with in my head. So you said that the state can sort of say, how things will go. With the 50 states, I imagine that's probably different across all the states.
Correct.
But then also with the way the nature of work has changed, people can now work in different countries. They can still retain their U.S. citizenship and even their state of residence, but still work in different countries.
Correct.
How do you see all of this becoming more messy or more complicated as people are moving around a lot more?
Yeah. So you're right, Derek. This is really state specific, and specifically the healthcare proxy and the power of attorney are super duper state specific. So if someone is a Massachusetts resident but spends 6 months in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, anywhere else, I would work with them differently than someone who just occasionally goes to Maine for a weekend or Rhode Island for a weekend. If we are dealing in overseas arrangements like yourself, we would just want to make sure that U.S. documents by treaty are honored in the other country.
Oh, can you say a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, some country organizations just have a joint agreement that says if you do a healthcare proxy in the United States, it's going to be recognized in another block of countries. I don't happen to know what they are right now, but that is available in some other countries.
Okay, interesting. Wow, all these things I had not been thinking about ever.
Oh, yes. It's like a ball of yarn. It just keeps going.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
So back to like the most of us who are the 99% who are living at home, going to business, some of us with children, some of us with elder parents we're taking care of. What is going to be the impetus to get us to plan? And I remember you saying once, Kerry, that it can like take a year for someone to even like start the plan. It's like they reached out to you at one point in the year, and then holidays happen, and tax time comes around, and then summer travel, and it's really hard to sit down. And I can say for myself personally, I have a will, I have a trust, and it does take a little bit of discipline to sit down and go through these conversations, the paperwork, but it is worth it in the end to realize, right, there's a plan, there's clarity, there's a backup person to that person. There's something very enriching, I find, to know that you have people close to you who are thinking about you in that way, who are willing and able to step up on your behalf and the behalf of your in that way, and who have someone else that they can talk to help get it done. Both your counsel and the other backup people who are named in that will and trust. So it is I can say personally, it's very empowering. My business is in a trust. My house, my property is in a trust. And we can get to trust at another future time. But just to say there is something powerful, I think for Black people to keep in mind that we can actually have a handle on our affairs and that our affairs really do actually matter. And you don't want to wait till a crisis to figure out what the plan is. So with that in mind, you want to just give us a little overview of what people could expect if they did want to sit down and do sort of like basic intro estate planning, or maybe we use a different planning.
Planning. Let's say planning. So the good news is if everybody is on their game, this can be done in 10 weeks.
It's about 3 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the person who is wanting to get a plan in place, the majority of their work is done upfront. So we'll have a conversation with a client. I don't charge for sort of an initial scope conversation. If someone just says, well, this is what I have, these are my concerns, what should I be thinking about? Sort of that's crafting the plan. We don't charge for that. If the client wants to come on board, we will have them fill out a questionnaire saying who do they want in the various roles, how do they want to distribute their stuff, and to whom. And once that is done, Melanie, if you're hiring me, your work is done. So once you get that done, it's back on me and my colleagues to draft documents that we will review in draft form so that, Melanie, if these are your documents, you're comfortable navigating them. And then we sign in person and you're done. But all of pretty much the client work is done at the beginning.
I want to just complicate this a little bit because we're at the age where people are getting married and they're also getting divorced. So when it comes to prenups and divorces and, spouses maybe want to hide assets from other spouses or other things, like I don't even know how to ask the question. Does event planning come into play somehow in terms of like preserving assets or hiding assets or, like what happens in those situations?
Yeah. So as part of our engagement letter, if the two of you are signing it, you have to attest that you're being truthful. So if you are not being truthful and I am working with the two of you as a couple, I am not allowed to hide something from the other. So Derek, if you come to me and say, oh, I don't want Melanie to know about X, Y, and Z, I say I have to tell Melanie about X, Y, and Z. I'm working with the two of you as one client. So that is not possible.
Okay. And I'm not putting it out there that people should do this. I want to make that clear. People, that was not an attempt to give you permission. I just wanted to ask the question. Just to bring the question out there.
That said, if you had a trust before you got married, right, you actually can have your affairs separate and say that I'm entering into this new relationship. So let's say you do a prenup as you're about to get married. I'm entering into this relationship. Here are my affairs that are just mine. And then there's going to be separate stuff that are jointly out. So there's an art to being able to map out and plan these things. And I think to me, there's just something very important. I say as a woman, as well as a Black person, to have handle on your affairs, even before you're engaged with another person. Plan your stuff.
So Melanie, that's a great point because in Massachusetts, the one person you are not allowed to disinherit is your spouse. So if it is important to you that assets stay separate, and I mean assets from a checking account up to mega, then a prenup may be the appropriate way to start. So sort of to get everything lined up with the various buckets. And then you can talk to an estate planner about taking care of everybody else, with the structure in place. But as I say, in Massachusetts, the one person you can't disinherit is your spouse.
And what's the worst outcome you've seen? Like, have people come to you when they didn't have an estate plan, and they're like, I'm going through, all of this, these things are happening to me. Can I pull something together now? It's probably too late at that point. But what are some of the worst case scenarios you've seen?
If a person has lost capacity and nursing home or what have you, and there's no power of attorney in place and bills need to be paid and there's no healthcare proxy in place and medical care needs to be provided, at that point, there's really nothing that you can do. Because if that person doesn't have the legal capacity to be my client, because they are my client, not the family members, then there's really nothing that we can do for them. And unfortunately, you have to revert back to the Commonwealth laws for the more intrusive set of possibilities.
But here's a scenario that I think does apply to a lot of us, whether we think so or not. I remember, Kerry, you mentioning once about, again, when we think about the importance of being able to keep a property in a family, and this is traditionally true with Black families who own property, and it's certainly true in historic sections of Boston, where the family tries as best as it can to keep the house that was so hard won. It's all odds in the family. And so that you have adult children who might have grown up in the house, or because they were the children of the homeowner or the nieces and nephews of the homeowner or the grandchildren of the homeowner, and that homeowner ages out, they pass. The fact that this property is going to continue to be cared for in the family, but you got these adult folks who have other priorities in their life, or maybe moved away from the homestead. And it's a burden. It's a financial burden, in some way, legal burden, to take care of property. So to your point, where you've described this kind of scenario to me, and I have seen this, it's like, it's one thing that legally have the property and get to have it, but also costs money to maintain it, or to make the decision about when to sell it or to develop. And so, you want to be responsible to the people who you're leaving this property behind, and you think you're being responsible by making sure that they get to have it, but you also need a plan for how they're going to manage it. So can you talk a little bit about how estate planning addresses?
Yeah, I run into that a lot in a variety of circumstances. So when the grandparents, parents, whomever the driving older factors are in the home, everyone gathers for the most part around those people, and it's about spending time with those people in that environment. When those people are gone, not one will maintain the same emotional connection to the property. So it's a very hard conversation to have, because what was a home now, to a small extent, becomes a business. So you are asking siblings, cousins, multi-generations to, in effect, run a business together. And all of these individuals will have different financial priorities. So to your point.
And needs, because I also have seen where, like, well, a couple of the people aren't financially independent and want to be able to, let's say, live in the house, and others are I can't take this on. I can't take care of this property. So you live there. I don't have the means of time. So it can be very complex in that as well.
And it's a very hard conversation to have with the current homeowners, or, as I say, the hub of this hub and spoke relationship, because I have to ask them to think about these things. And I am asking them to think about discord, and how do we resolve discord? How do we resolve differing priorities? So to simply passes along a host of emotional and financial issues that can be dealt with up front, but have to be dealt with really specifically. So, Melanie, to your point, houses cost money to maintain, and around here they cost a lot of money to maintain. So to ask a group of people to prioritize those financial needs over their own causes strife. So is there maybe, and this is where partnering with financial advisors and other professionals is critical. Have you set some money aside solely for the care and upkeep of the house? so that someone doesn't have to say, I need my own new roof. I can't put a new roof on this house. My own is leaking. I can't do these both at the same time. Secondly, if someone does want to stay in the house, who's paying the bills? So if you're living there, who's going to pay the property taxes? Who's going to pay the utilities? Think about something like, for lack of a better phrase, a rental agreement. It's taking the emotion out of it so that the family relationships can continue.
Well said.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. That's great. And thinking about how this is all a legal process and these are legal documents, where does this get filed somewhere? So for example, when you buy a piece of property, it gets registered with the registry of deeds or whatever it's called in whatever state or municipality you're in. Is there a similar process for these documents?
The good news is no. So these all stay private. And that is one of the beauties of the trust, which we can take care of at a later session. The only document that gets filed with any government agency is the will, and that's only when we pass away. So as I said before, you can change it as many times as you want, and it's only the last one in place when we pass away that gets filed with the probate court.
So where would you recommend, so if someone does an estate plan, where would you recommend that they keep it? So, because, people over the decades accumulate lots of paper, it gets stored under things or in things, or if it's digital, it could be on a disk, it could be on a thumb drive, it could be anywhere. Yeah. So how do you help people think about where to store it so their beneficiaries or their successors can find it?
So if the law firm provides storage facilities, keep it with the law firm. Especially the will needs to be kept absolutely pristine, and you can't even remove the staple. Otherwise, the probate court wonders if it's been tampered with. So also, if we've got little kids in the house, these things are printed on beautiful paper. And it's a lot of paper, and there's a blank side on every piece of paper. So you're sort of asking for little hands with crayons to find them. It's just not fair to ask that. So again, if you can keep it with the attorneys, I would do that. You will get digital copies, and depending on who you work with, there's usually a process after the signing where we talk about administrative next steps, what documents to share, with whom, what do you need to do next steps about beneficiary designations and things like that. So if you can keep it with the lawyer, I would.
And so, Derek, to your point, someone just needs to know who the lawyer is.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
Connecting the last dot. I hadn't thought about that. Okay.
Yeah.
I need to sit and marinate with all this. It's a lot of information, but
also the dog could eat your estate plan. So we have to cross that one off the list as well.
That's true. That's true. You never know. You never know. Anything more you want to ask, Melony?
Now I'm curious if there's anything else Kerry wants to share with us or have us think about.
We all deserve plans of our own design.
Yeah.
So, let's not let the state do it for us. This does truly apply to everybody. If there is something of value in your world, then you have an estate. Terrible word, but you have an estate. So, let's get instructions of your choosing and people of your choice in place to help you out.
So it's bank accounts of all kinds, checking accounts, savings accounts, money market accounts.
Also, it's jewelry, maybe even cars. I'm guessing cars as well.
Sure.
Cars not so much, but
if it's a special car, right? If it's
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then and also other special heirloom items that you receive handed down.
Yeah. It could be a particular Thanksgiving or holiday platter that has a lot of meaning to someone. You want it to get to that person.
Yeah.
So there's no dollar value on any of this stuff.
And then you also just have other instructions in there for if any point you're incapacitated. We know who can step in and speak and make decisions on your behalf. As a power of attorney, that's so powerful to know, okay, I've empowered someone to act as me. Yeah. Right. You get to talk with them about that. And that's important and intimate.
Yeah.
Important.
Heavy stuff, I know.
Very heavy, very heavy. I wasn't quite ready for this. I don't know what I was expecting. All good information, of course.
Derek is usually prepared for everything, so it's really interesting to watch him like synthesizing this personally on
Well,
screen. Yeah.
Let me see if this helps, Derek. I just had a virtual meeting with someone the other day, and sort of as an initial conversation, and as we wrapped up, she said, "That was it?"
Right.
Yep. I expected something so much heavier and so much more burdensome. She's like, "That was pretty good."
Mm.
And my favorite part of the engagement is I literally see somebody shrink and exhale after they've signed it and just say, "Oh my God, it's done.
Yeah.
I did it.
Mhm.
I don't have to worry about this anymore." It is, I see a physical reaction when someone signs. It's like, "I did it. I got it done. It wasn't that bad." So
And it's
relief,
not so
relief is 10 weeks away.
you can change it in a year
Yes.
if something happens.
Right.
Marry, some other important life event happens, and you're like, oh,
Right.
I want to change the rules a little bit. You get to
Right.
do
Right.
Yes, the documentation part of it does not sound burdensome, does not sound onerous. That part of it's like, I feel like I do enough of those online aggregators that say, okay, put all your banking numbers here, your retirement numbers here, and then it sort of totals things up. I mean, that part doesn't really kind of get to me. It's more about thinking about, who do I want to be my power of attorney? Who do I want to be my medical proxy?
Yeah.
Who's going to inherit these things? And if my friends or family are watching this, they're going to be like me. So I'm like, okay, I need to really think about this. So
I'm gonna promise you, I'm happy to be your accountability buddy, and you can just use me as what do they call a sounding board, and just talk about it out loud. Because it's also really another important way to do this is to have somebody objective in your life, and to some extent that can be your attorney, but they're also really busy, So but like to have somebody that you could just brainstorm, and if this happens, then da 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 da.
Yeah.
And for me, even like writing out medical wishes, like. And then this is where I think people get very scared and like tight and tense about. But I'm like, no, I want to be very clear that if I'm in the hospital and XYZ thing happens, I'm open to these scenarios, but not these scenarios. Like, it's helpful to just brainstorm out loud with somebody who's not attached to the.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be that for you.
Yeah.
I will take you up on that offer.
And Derek, I work with a lot of people who get stuck. So I say, well, let's pivot this. Do you know who you don't want? And that one's really easy. That is super easy. So people can immediately run down a list like, I don't want this person knowing my stuff. This person is terrible in a medical situation. This person never pays their own bills on time. Forget mine. So who's left after you've run the list of the people who you definitely don't want knowing your business? Who's left?
That's a good framework. I can start on that side of things.
Yeah,
that
one's easy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got a lot to think about. Thank you so much for coming on today and getting the juices flowing, getting the thinking happening.
Thanks, Derek and Melony. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, and I think we'll have you back on. We want to then like dive in a little bit to like the joy of trust.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And also what trusts are too.
Yeah. That's what's to trust and why have it.
Yep. All right, great. So for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the question or comment field on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Black Lining Forum. Thanks and take care.
Thank you.